Aloha aina, ano ai, velina kako. Welcome to Free Hawaii News, brought to you by the Koani Foundation, presenting Hawaiian perspectives on a broad range of topics and issues affecting the Hawaiian Islands, the Pacific, and the world. Your hosts for Free Hawaii News are Leon Kaulahau-Siu, musician, composer, diplomat, and political analyst, and Hinaleimoana Wong, Kumu filmmaker, cultural and Hawaiian language preservationist, and community leader. And now, Free Hawaii News.
Ano ai me ke aloha ia kākoa pauloa I ke yahiahi nei, e ko Hawaii nei pai aina puni mahalo anu I ke yahui ana o wau no keia o Kumuhina.
And my name is Leon Kaulahau-Siu, and we welcome you to this episode of Free Hawaii News. Today, there are more Kanaka Maoli or Hawaiians living outside of the Hawaiian Islands than in it. That represents a stunning change for not only Hawaii itself, but also for the Kanaka and their families who have moved away. Cost of living, or being able to make ends meet financially, is the overwhelming reason for this exodus. Many Kanaka today are grappling with the consequences of their decision to leave their homeland. One of those is Hawaiian filmmaker Chris Romento, who made the film short Dear Aloha. This film asks the question, how do Hawaiians who have moved out of Hawaii keep the feeling of aloha in their hearts even when they live thousands of miles away? Let's take a look now at a short clip of the film.
What does aloha mean to me? Well, for me, when I think of aloha, it's your being. It's who you are. Aloha is embedded in your breath, in what you do, especially if you are Kanaka, if you're Hawaii. You have this generational knowledge of aloha. Aloha sustains Hawaiians by reminding us who we are. And here we go, Noi Kiala. Watch your step. Hello? Okay, here we go. It's slow, so 1, 2, 3. If any sticks you stepped on, you gotta move them. Growing up in Hawaii was very different for me just because I grew up in a very Hawaiian household. And when I say Hawaiian household, I mean we spoke Olelo Hawaii. I was in halau, so everything that was surrounding my life was Hawaiian. I left Hawaii to go to school to pursue higher education, and I haven't returned home yet. About 2008, I wanted to go home. When I started to make that trek to go home, I realized it is not affordable. That's how we make le'ewi quiet. Because we gotta make sure we don't cut off our hand. Okay. Funny story, I only started learning about the diaspora like 2017. And it's funny because the generations above me have no idea when I talk to them about that. They're like, who is this diaspora? Who's auntie that? I'm like, that's not an auntie. That's okay. So even my mom, we were talking about it. She's like, what is diaspora? I was like, Mom, that's us. We live away from our homeland. No matter where we go, when you make a lei, the story's still there. Because when I make a lei, I don't just think about being here in Oregon. I can envision where I've made lei before. Like, this lei can take me home. I can be back in Hawaii in that moment of making lei.
We are honored to have with us in the studio Dear Aloha filmmaker Chris Romento. Aloha, Chris.
Aloha.
It's good to have you here.
Mahalo for having me.
Thank you for joining us. This is such an interesting topic. Why did you want to make this film?
I made this film to honor my father, who's in the film, and every diasporic person's experience. I moved away from Hawaii when I was 7 years old with my family, and we moved to the continent. We moved to Washington State, and when I moved back home, so I was away for about 30 years, and then 2 years ago I moved back home to Hawaii, and I wanted to tell a story about contemporary Hawaii, keeping in mind the lens that I had as a diasporic Hawaiian. So what that looked like, what that even almost smelled like.
Could you explain to our viewers what is diaspora?
The diaspora in its basic term is a people that move away from their ancestral homeland.
I see.
So when you are talking about the diaspora, this is a very known term. So we have the Asian diaspora, we have Black diaspora, Jewish diaspora. It's been used before. However, in contemporary Hawaii, we're using the Hawaiian diaspora to also frame it that it is not necessarily a choice that people move away from their ancestral homeland.
Yeah. So currently, how large is this diaspora?
U.S. Census Bureau in 2020 reported that 53% of Hawaiians no longer live on the islands. And right now...
What was the number again? 50 what?
53%.
53%.
Yeah, so it's more than half of Hawaiians now.
Yeah, talking about Native Hawaiians.
Native Hawaiians. So it's the majority of Hawaiians now live on the continent or away from home. So this is something that has been happening for many generations. However, right now, when we look at the unaffordable housing, the expensive groceries, the food insecurity that we have here in Hawaii, this diaspora feels like a displacement when you contextualize it for a Hawaiian diaspora in contemporary Hawaii, where a lot of us are moving away because we are priced out of paradise and continue to be priced out of paradise. And this is an issue that I think a lot of eyes are on now, and we're only starting to become familiar with the word Hawaiian diaspora.
Yes.
A lot of people also like to call it a displacement. Both terms are interchangeable from a lot of the people I've spoken with. The general feeling that resonates is this deep shame that comes from leaving home. And this deep shame is also a severance that you have when you're disconnected from your homeland. There's so many nuances to the diaspora. There are generational diaspora, meaning people who are Native Hawaiian, who are born outside of the continent or out on the continent and have never even touched our oceans, our shores. And it is a shame that people carry that, for instance, people when they don't speak Olelo Hawaii, or they don't know how to do hula, or they don't have a pidgin accent. Like, these are things that also attribute to a shame that people carry because they feel guilty for not being in Hawaii. But I think the important thing to recognize is this isn't entirely a diasporic Hawaiian's fault. This isn't our fault. The deep shame that we feel is not our fault.
What do you think helps us sustain Kanaka in that kind of a situation?
Yeah, so the film is called Dear Aloha because I do acknowledge that there is this thread of aloha, essentially, that connects us all as a lahui, even living far away. For a lot of people in the diaspora, it's our sense of belonging. It is what we're taught from a very young age, what we see and what we know. So when we don't have anything else to hold on to, it's our aloha that is our resilience, that keeps us connected.
So, well, how did you keep connected? Was it your parents who told you about Hawaii, or did you visit often? Or?
Yeah, so my family, I grew up in Hawaii, in Aiea, and my parents moved away when I was 7 years old, and we moved to Washington State. And my father was a dancer. He danced hula, and I grew up watching him dance hula. And
did he study under Daryl Lupanui?
Yes, he did actually.
I thought okay.
He did, and he went to the Maori Monarch in the 70s, which I mean is the most amazing, epic time for Mary Monarch. And I grew up with those stories, and my family tried so hard to keep us connected culturally, but it was kind of a quiet heartbreak for my father that I experienced, and you can see in the film as well, for him to leave and slowly stop dancing. But he never forgot his aloha. He never forgot how proud he was to be Hawaiian.
Do you find that among the Hawaiians in diaspora that they do maintain that connection as far as in spirit and in their lifestyle and things like that?
Oh yeah, there's so many instances that I wanted to capture even in the film, like a sign that says mahalo for removing your shoes. Everyone in the diaspora has a sign like that, or lei like hung up somewhere. I mean, these are very physical ways that we show it, but I think that Hawaiians are so proud in the diaspora to be Hawaiian, and now there's so many programs that are starting up for, I think, people who grew up and didn't have that. They're growing up now and trying to create these programs to help people sustain their culture, because we are now currently majority living away. It's the majority experience to live away.
Right.
So you're seeing a lot more of these pop up, these nonprofits that help with cultural knowledge sharing.
I'm so glad that you could join us and talk a little bit about your film and all that. And I think it's going to be a very profoundly received film that's going to be well received.
Thank
because
you.
it's such a tender topic to many of us.
Yeah.
And so mahalo for doing that. The extremely high cost of living here in Hawaii, combined with the lack of affordable housing, is the #1 reason driving Hawaiians out of Hawaii. Because of that, many Hawaiians and other residents are seeking solutions to this problem. One solution-based organization in particular is the Lahaina Community Land Trust in Lahaina, Maui, which was created after the devastating fires in August of 2023. Autumn Ness serves as its executive director, nurturing the long-term vision of creating affordable housing ownership to West Maui residents so that Hawaiians can afford to live in their homeland. We now go to Lahaina, Maui, where Autumn Ness is standing by.
Aloha, Leon. It's great to see you.
Was there an article published recently that said so much of Maui's housing today was never meant for Hawaiians and other locals in the first place? Could you explain that, please?
There was a recent article published in Kawaiola, Housing for Whom was the title, and it gave some really stark data, some of which is that fewer than half of the new homes built in West Maui since 2010 are housing full-time residents, fewer than half. So for the last 15 years, homes that are built, most of them end up as second homes or as short-term rentals. That's what the data says. We also know that only 2/3 of Maui as a whole, single family homes are for our residents. Most of them are vacation rentals. Some of them are second homes for the wealthy. That's for a few reasons. The cost of new construction is really high. So when you look at what a newly constructed home costs, there aren't a lot of local resident buyers for a house in that price bracket. Yeah. When you look at the style of the construction, the neighborhoods they're in, it just doesn't pencil out. And so that's another argument around the fact that we just can't build our way out of this crisis because the homes that are being built are not in the market for residents.
How large a role do offshore investors and vacation rentals play in this problem?
Vacation rentals and offshore investors are driving the housing crisis, in my opinion. How many stories have you heard about somebody that you know made an offer on a house and were outbid by a cash offer that came in over the listing price?
Could long-term protections help solve Hawaii's housing crisis?
Long-term protections can absolutely solve our crisis. In fact, I think they're the only thing that will.
If affordable housing can be created in Hawaii, do you believe Hawaiian families will move back home?
Absolutely. I want to share the story of one of our biggest donors to the Lahaina Community Land Trust is a family that was displaced from West Maui pre-fire because of economics and are living in Northern California. And they have given as much money to the Lahaina Community Land Trust as a small foundation. And we talk to this couple regularly. All they want is to come back home. They're actively looking for opportunities. The husband let us know that on days when he's feeling really homesick, he goes onto Google Maps, Google Earth, and he walks old streets virtually and listens to Hawaiian music. And I know for sure, given the opportunity, they would come home.
What is the answer to keeping Hawaiians from moving away, even though there's not enough affordable housing right now?
This question actually makes me really emotional because I don't know. I do know personally so many families who are just white knuckling it and living in conditions where there's 3, 4, 5 people to one bedroom, where, cousin and the kids are living in the garage and they're figuring they got to park a block away because there's too many cars for this house. It feels almost unfair for us to have to figure out how to keep Hawaiians from moving away when there's not safe, attainable, dignified housing, I know where you're getting at with this question, and I don't know the answer besides asking them to live in situations that are really uncomfortable, and so that's the thing that keeps me and the Lahaina Community Land Trust team up at night, because it feels like we just can't work fast enough. Every day that it takes longer, every month longer that it takes, people are living in unsustainable situations, So I wish I had a better answer for that, except that we just have to work harder and faster.
How large a role does aloha aina, the Hawaiian concept of love for the land and ancestral connection to the land, play in all of this?
Aloha aina is inherently a collective act, right? And when you start to think about what happened when the concept of private land ownership came to Hawaii, that's when all this started going haywire, right? You can compare the Western capitalist concept of private land ownership and the rights that come as a landowner, the rights for you to extract every dollar that can be extracted from your piece of land, whether it's by housing or whatever. You compare that to the Hawaiian concept of when there's not land ownership, it's land stewardship. And instead of rights that come with that, it's responsibilities, right? That's exactly what we're trying to do here. What responsibilities to your community come with the honor of stewarding or owning pieces of land? And so that's what we do at the Lahaina Community Land Trust every day, is try to restore the kuleana to land ownership. And that means not using housing as a wealth generating opportunity, but using housing to stabilize our community and our future generations. Somebody else in that cohort of community land trusts that are learning together across Hawaii, somebody said, I remember it, private land ownership is a theft of the commons. And that's kind of what our work at the Lahaina Community Land Trust rests on. I think it's the future of stable housing in Hawaii is returning that the commons, the land, back to the community and using it for the public good, which is stable housing.
You're watching Free Hawaii News, giving you the Kanaka perspective on issues in Hawaii.
Last month there was the welcoming, or actually the celebration, of Hokule's 50th anniversary of its launching. And so again we had a huge gathering at Kualoa. And the interesting thing about this is that it started to bring back lots of memories. I was there at the launch, and of course I was there last year when Festback celebrated the waka, the canoes. But this time it was talking about Hokule and its 50th anniversary, and it got me to thinking about the impact of what Hokule did in the Pacific. We know that it had kind of a shaky start, you know, but because there was this really interesting thing about the conflict of interest or the loss of our culture, or the loss of our memory about our ancient navigational exploits and what we had done. And here we were trying to get it back, but at the same time they were conducting like a scientific anthropological experiment about whether or not Hawaiians or Polynesians could actually sail over this great ocean. And so at the start there was this real huki, which was really a cultural clash. It was between the expectations of the scientific Western community and the awakening of this consciousness in Hawaii about us being Pacific Islanders and not Westerners.
My sentiments about Hokule, ho'omaikai. Hulo. He kanalima mau makahiki, 50 years of Hokule and what Wa'akaulua o Hokule represents. For me personally, I absolutely must acknowledge Papa Mau Piailug for being the man from our relations further in the Pacific, in the Moana Nui Akea, coming from the islands that we now all recognize as the Micronesian Islands, and Satawal Island to be exact. And Papa Mau Piailug shares his knowledge with our Kanaka from here in Hawaii, and he also mentored several others as well. But this gave rise to Hokule, and me being born in 1972, at this time where I was just a young child, all of this resurgence of culture, and as you mentioned, having to, can you imagine, to me quite insultingly, but having to prove to Westerners, to foreigners, that we had the knowledge and the skill, the capacity to navigate thousands of miles of ocean. And our genealogies tell us this. Our genealogies span the thousands of miles of the Moana Nui, and our family relations are spread throughout the Pacific. So when I think back to how much I personally owe, I would not be on this path of doing things that uplift and honor and, how do I say it, doing my contribution to perpetuate culture, language, our Hawaiian worldview. I would not be on this road were it not for Hokule, And were it not for Papa Maupiailu. And there are several others of us just within my own immediate circle whom came from Kamehameha. In the 80s and into the 90s, students from Kamehameha were taken as ambassadors of our culture, our language, our practices, along with other loea of their range of skills and knowledge bases. And we traveled alongside Hokule. And we were essentially the Kanaka for whom this canoe represents. So I'm very thankful. I'm truly humbled. And you mentioned that you got a chance to go to Kualoa. I went on one of the following days to the benefit dinner, which was held at the convention center. So it really was wonderful because I heard the songs, I saw the dances that many of those I learned myself in sharing to accompany Hokule. We saw many faces that are still around, as well as we reminisced about those whom are no longer with us. So ho'omaikaʻia Hokule. What's your...
Well, of course, Malia and I were involved with Hokule from its launching and of course watching it. And we were friends with Herb Kane, who is the visionary who fished this out of the ocean, out of his memory and out of his genealogy, out of who he is, and he brought this back into life. And but we were involved also in the making of the National Geographic special, which had to do with the first trip to Tahiti, which was historic, and like you said, we didn't have to prove it to ourselves, but we proved it to the world that Polynesians, Micronesians, Melanesians are very capable of moving over this vast ocean. And in fact, we had settled this entire ocean 1,000 years before Christopher Columbus was born. And all we hear about the wonderful exploits of Christopher Columbus and his drift, finding a continent by drifting to it. Whereas our people picked islands out of the sea. We fished them out of the sea. And so, but it wasn't until Hokule's voyage that it just really sparked, I believe, the Renaissance that we're talking about. The language was coming back and our hula was coming back, but Hokule really expanded our view of not just us as Hawaiians, but as us as Pacific Islanders. And it also reawakened in the Pacific Islands this legacy that had almost been totally lost, except for Mau and a few others scattered in the Pacific. There were a handful, you could count on one hand, who could really navigate the oceans. And Mau very graciously decided to break tradition and share his knowledge. And by doing so, he basically awakened the entire Pacific. And so Hokule was instrumental in doing that. And what is wonderful is to see there are now 29 voyaging canoes in the Pacific. To see that people have taken kuleana of this, and they're part of the ocean, and they're sailing all the time. It's not like we plan a trip and we publicize it and all that. Some of these people are simply sailing because that's where they're called to go, and so sometimes in groups and sometimes by themselves. The most powerful thing I think that has happened is that the Pacific under colonialism had been pretty much, how would you say, colonialized to where we've forgotten our cultures. Hawaii more so than many other places, but still everybody was affected by it. And how we became so dependent on the ways of the Western world, to the point where our food sources and everything was starting to be imported, and we had to depend on motorboats in recent history to get from one island to the other so that we could pick up groceries and things like that. And so one of I think the most wonderful things about this is that the talk about why were sailing canoes important. going on soon after Hokule sailed, was that we said to each other, you know, this brings independence to us, in that we can sail our canoes between our islands like we used to do, and not be dependent on these fossil fuel motorboats that are finicky and all that. Then we'd have that amount of freedom and go back to being ourselves. And so that's what's happened. Besides the 29 waka moana that's out there, there are dozens and dozens of smaller canoes that sail between islands. And now the medicines, the food and things and supplies that are brought from a main island to the small island can be fetched by the people on the small island with their waka. They can go and sail to the place and pick it up and come back. So this has awakened a whole new thing of not just independence, but of freedom and of self-reliance. You know, so, and that's just a small part of it. The other part is, of course, the cultural awakening that this has happened. The protocols, you know, and the genealogies that came out of this. So it has literally sparked a reawakening of the entire Pacific.
I know firsthand that a lot of our cultural resurgence and that which we acknowledge as our cultural lives in 2025, when we think back to the origins of this reinstatement of the soul of our people via Hokule and its achievements, when we look to the core, Papa Maupiailu is one of the most prominent names. He and the people that he comes from. And so I extend much heartfelt aloha for our brothers and sisters of the Pacific for their treasure that has become our treasure as well. The Royal Mausoleum at Mauna Ala is the final resting place for Hawaiian royalty and is considered one of the most sacred sites in all of Hawaii. This 3.5-acre site in Nu'uanu, adjacent to the Oahu Cemetery, is home to more than 50 ali'i and trusted advisors. It is the family burial plot of the Kamehameha and Kalakaua dynasties and others of prominence from Hawaii Island. For more than 100 years, the lineal descendants of the High Chief Ho'olulu, a trusted advisor to Kamehameha I, served as caretakers or kahu for Mauna Ala Royal Mausoleum. Last year, that changed with the appointment by the State Department of Land and Natural Resources of a non-lineal descendant. To tell us more, we have with us in the studio one of the lineal descendants, James Mayoho. James, aloha kāua.
Aloha. Mahalo for having me.
Ai, mahalo anui for being here today. For our viewers out there, please, we're going to engage in this discussion because this is an extremely contentious discussion in and amongst our Kanaka and our Lahui. So members of your ohana or family, they've been the kahu or caretakers at Mauna Ala or the Royal Mausoleum for many generations now. Please, can you tell us a bit about the history of that?
The genesis of the kuleana is really with the placement from Kamehameha I before he passed away in 1819. He made plans for his own burial. There was a family prior to ours, the family of Na'ihe, who had this kuleana for the protection of the Kamehameha line bones. His father's cave had been compromised to some of the Western sailors that had come in, and that upset him, and he had lost trust. So he actually picked Ho'opili, who was Ho'olulu's older half-brother by 19 years, close to the bosom, very close. He had replaced his father, Kame'emoku, as a counselor, as part of the Kona Five Chiefs, to advise Kamehameha, and it tapped him and his brother to hide his iwi after his passing. And they did that the Kuleana had remained with them following that to protect the Kamehamehas. And then I do want to clarify that with this Kuleana, we're talking about Mauna Ala, but the Kuleana is really to the iwi. And Ho'olulu had a son a few weeks after the event when they hid Kamehameha in an underwater cave. And they named him Kaiheʻekai, Ocean Octopus Ocean, to kind of mark where the hidden cave was, because it was underwater. It was only reachable by underwater. And Kaiheʻekai then, after his father Ho'olulu, who took over other kuleanas, they had other areas all over the place. He was given kuleana for all of the iwi. So he had Lahaina, he had Pohukaina, and then eventually that migrated up to Mauna Ala with the procession of the Kamehamehas, which was 1865 after the place opened. Kaiheʻekai passes shortly after that, but the kuleana remains the same. He still had the kuleana Lahaina, he still had Pohukaina. So I want to be very clear that although that ground is sacred, it's because those iwi are there that the kuleana exists. The genealogies are important, not just in our wider cultural practice, but particularly for that family, because of the amount of mauna that is at Mauna Ala. And that's part of what makes Mauna Ala so special, is every pohaku, every blade of grass, every tree is imbued with the mana of those that have been buried there, since 1865. And in our understanding of mana from before Pa'ao, that is the basis of our Hawaiianness. That is the basis of what makes us the spiritual people that we are, this life force, right? And it takes a recognized and equal mana to do the job for those iwi that are family. And because of this lineage, this is my family. This was my cousin's family. I'm among others. There are others that are tied there too, but this particular kuleana is to all of these iwi that are all our line, because everybody that's there is one big family. The Kalakaus are cousins. Everybody in the Kamehameha crypt, even the chiefs they brought over. There's over 50 just in the Kamehameha crypt itself. I can document well over 100 iwi on that site. And I suspect there's more because of the Battle of Nu'uanu. But the mana that they recognize is very important, because the job entails, it's a very narrow kuleana to be called kahu. We called it keeper early on, or could be caretaker or curator. The charge is the physical and spiritual protection of those iwi, right? So what does that mean? Then it was keeping them hidden, making sure nobody could take them and desecrate them, make fish hooks, that kind of thing. In today's modern world, in 2025, what does that mean? It means protecting their mana from being leveraged by people for their own ambitions. It means protecting them from the leveraging that the state is doing and encroaching onto that soil and using them for their own purposes, whether it be an upcoming tourist attraction or something like that. It's to protect that. So I just happen to be the next in line, and it's my responsibility that I take very, very sacredly to keep these iwi protected from what the modern state and world is trying to do and encroach and attach themselves to.
Why do you think that now the position is it belongs to someone that was selected by the DLNR? What are your thoughts on this?
This is a controversial and hot topic, and so I don't say anything that I'm not prepared to litigate. So my experience with this and my understanding, and my father clocked this early on. I was a little more lenient and trust with that, is that what you have really is you have a state department, a parks department, that has ambitions for what it wants to do with Mauna Ala. Mauna Ala has been a state park for a long time, but it wasn't treated like that. It was treated a little separately because of the sacredness of its place and the meaningful inclusiveness of the place, to not just the societies and the civic clubs and the trusts, but to people in general that would just come through Malama as being Hawaiian, you know. And there was a tone, a plan to modernize the place, make it a tourist stop, you know, be able to bring in more foot traffic, really make it the gemstone, which was the personal ambition of the head of parks, of the state park system, because it's, as I've been reminded by him, a state monument, not a state park, but really to make that the focal gemstone of the whole system. So that means doing what? Things like putting in QR codes, things like putting in billboards back by the Lua, you know, holding events for people in the tourism industry, those types of things. And this is codified. I mean, I have a lot of support from inside the government, and these are things that are, you know, were part of the plan. My family was an obstacle to that.
What were some of the sentiments, if you're able to speak to this, that your family had when they came to know that you were not going to be installed as the kahu, and instead, I do believe that there was a note made that the current caretaker, who does not utilize the term kahu because kahu has a different cultural implication with it, but the current caretaker or curator, I believe is the more appropriate term. That curator is somebody that was appointed by the DLNR chair, and it was their relative?
So my understanding of this is that yes, the current person there, and you know, God bless her, is the niece of the chair of the DLNR, Don Chang's niece. I think technically it's her ex-husband Barry's niece. There's a close familiarity there. There's some sort of tie. The process that went through, the hiring process, if we're talking about cultural merits, in my opinion, wasn't based on the merits. It had to do with some larger issues about what the state feels the vision of Mount Olive should be.
Do you know what that is?
I believe it's to open it up to more tourism, modernize it, again, make it the gemstone of the state park system.
Mahalo, James, for joining us today, and we look forward to possibly seeing you again in the future.
Mahalo, I appreciate you.
Mahalo nui.
Still to come on Free Hawaii News. Progress for Hawaii at the United Nations.
There are some basic misconceptions about the UN and its role. Most people think of it as some kind of powerful international governing body, but it is not. Think of it as a country club in which there are a few very strong founding members who pretty much run everything, but they allow the members with less substance or seniority to participate. People often ask me, what are we doing at the UN? Or why doesn't the UN just recognize the Hawaiian Kingdom as a sovereign country? Or why are we trying to get into the UN? First of all, we're not trying to join the UN. I repeat, the Hawaiian Kingdom is not trying to join the UN. We are there to petition the UN to hold one of its most prominent members, the United States of America, accountable for its piracy of the Hawaiian Islands. As some of you may know, I have been representing the interests of the Hawaiian Kingdom as the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the past 25 years. It's an unpaid position. Foreign affairs is often called foreign relations, which in our case is a more accurate description of my job, which is to keep our story and our cause in front of the international community and to parlay that into getting international help to free Hawaii. Much of my attention is focused on the United Nations because if we want to talk to countries, the United Nations is the best place to be because all the nations have their foreign representatives, their diplomats, at the UN. There are two peaceful approaches that a country can take to settle a dispute with another country. One, they can take legal action and have a court of law settle the issue. Or two, they can use the diplomatic approach and negotiate a settlement. The legal approach sets up an adversarial platform where two sides argue legal rights and the court decides who is right or wrong. The diplomatic approach sets up a cooperative platform where things are worked out in a friendly way. The legal deck is literally stacked against us from prevailing in court. Every case has either been dismissed or received an unfavorable ruling, and every case we lose creates precedents to quash the next legal challenge we bring. Even the highest international courts are precluded from taking cases having to do with the question of Hawaii's sovereignty because of the UN's position that Hawaii is part of the United States. As I have explained before, the official stance of the United Nations, and thus the courts, is that the Hawaii case is not a legal question, but a political question, and that political question was settled when Hawaii became a state of the United States. Besides the courts being closed to legal challenges, the nature of lawsuits is adversarial, where parties are opponents, legal combatants. On the other hand, the diplomatic approach is based on making friends, being able to talk through things together. So, in essence, what we have been doing for the past 25 years in the international community is telling our story and making friends. The strategy is working. 20 years ago, when I would tell the story of what happened to us, foreign leaders and diplomats would commiserate and say, "Oh, that's a sad story. We wish you good luck." Then 5 or so years ago later, as I kept showing up in diplomatic circles and they learned more about our situation and our determination, their response began to change to, "Do you really think this could happen?" Meaning, who knows? Maybe this is a possibility. But then about 5 or 6 years ago, they started to say, "How do you think we can help?" From good luck to how do you think we can help is a major shift in how the diplomatic community now views our situation. Over the years, we have steadily gained press exposure. And here I have some samples of exposure we've had in the diplomatic and international press, mostly in Europe. This is a magazine called Diva International, which is published in Geneva at the UN in Geneva. And so in 2019, we had this story. And the story has to do with the independence, the celebration of the 175th anniversary of Hawaii's independence. And as you can see, it is a nice story about it, and there's a second page about it, or a third page. So that's one of them. In an International Diplomat in 2023, this story was published, and it's about Hawaii, a nation in continuity. So the importance of these stories is that these are published for diplomats at the UN, and the diplomats all get a copy of this every quarter. Recently, in October of 2024, there appeared this story, and this story is about the Hawaiian treaties, and particularly about the treaty we had with Switzerland, because 2024 was the 160th anniversary of the treaty with Switzerland, the Hawaiian Kingdom Treaty with Switzerland. So this is a story about that treaty and about other treaties that we have. Now, the reason we have these stories published is to confront or to educate the diplomatic community about the situation of Hawaii. There have been many stories published in the American press, stories like the New York Times, press like the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Washington Times, LA Times, and most recently in the January issue of the Atlantic magazine. This is the cover of the Atlantic magazine of January 2025. So it's very recent. On this, they ran a story about Hawaii and about how Hawaiians would like to have their country back. So, and this is not just a couple of pages. This story runs for 17 pages in the Atlantic magazine. This is current. So as you can see, the world is beginning to understand and see that there is a situation in Hawaii that is calling for attention, and that situation is to free Hawaii. Our story is not hidden anymore. It is out there. It is our expectation that the UN General Assembly will be the body to nullify the United States' claim to the Hawaiian Islands, and by default, the Hawaiian Kingdom will be reinstated as the lawful governing entity of the Hawaiian Islands. And we will utilize the international mechanisms of the United Nations to assure a smooth and peaceful transition from U.S. control to self-government. The return of the Hawaiian Kingdom is closer than you think.
To you, my fellow Kanaka, just because we are required to carry American passports and other identification does not mean that we have to think, act, speak, do, and feel as an American. We are Hawaiian. We are Kanaka. We are from the noble peoples of the Pacific, the ocean we call the Moana Nui a Kea. Our identity is based on Mo'oku Auhau and Aina, and Pilina Aina. It is based on our genealogy and our relationship to the land from which we come from. Our value and worth is grounded, guided, and gifted by nothing else except one's kulana and the range of kuleana that is required of one's life. Perhaps some of you have heard me speak about kulana and kuleana. Kulana is our role. It is our place. It's our station. It is the position. Sometimes it's the title. Sometimes it's known as rank. But if we think about one's kulana, one's role, of which one can have many different roles, whether it be in family, community, work situation, we may hold many roles, but those roles all come with their share of kuleana. They come with their duties, obligations, and responsibilities that are pertinent to the kulana. The kulana will determine, the role will determine what the responsibilities are, and sometimes that role is also afforded the jurisdiction or authority, and sometimes the role does not come with any of that. So when we think about who we are as a people, sometimes Kumuhina gets asked to speak about Western understandings of identity which surround themselves around the discussion topic of sex and gender, but that's not where Kanaka are rooted, nor are we centered there. Our identity comes from the land that we come from and the families that have given birth to us, and the values, the value system that we should be guided by and our value be determined by is based off of our kulana and kuleana, our role and our responsibility and the fulfillment thereof. American society is predicated upon a system of individualism and capitalism. Pacific Island society is a dedicated system upholding collectivism and sharing. And that, everyone out there in viewerland, are some of my sentiments regarding that which weighs on my head and my heart and my spirit as well on the daily. So I say to you yet once again, when we look at each other for who we are, we simply need to look to where we came from and from whom we descend from. And when others look at us, we simply need to ensure that they're looking at us for the roles and responsibilities that we are entrusted to carry forth. Other than that, what can one really say about one another? We really don't have the place to say about others. Why? Because we're not from a society that is based on the individual. We're not from a society that cares itself or concerns itself with only what one personally wants. We come from a culture, a society, and a way of life where we place greater precedent and greater importance upon the collective and that which is good for the many. No laila, mahalo anui a'oko for sharing in this yet another opportunity for me to provide to you Kumu Hina's mana'o.
Mahalo nui for joining us for this episode of Free Hawaii News. We'd like to thank all of you for watching, and we also want to thank all of our guests for participating with us and giving us their mana'o.
Ai no leila, mahalo anui a'oko ke kipa ana mai, ka ho'onenea mai, a mahalo no ke launa ana no ho'i o kākou. Ahui ho, aloha.
We hope you enjoyed this month's episode of Free Hawaii News. Mahalo for watching. There's a new show every month, so this program will air several more times this month. You can view it anytime on Olelo's on-demand site or on YouTube. See you next time. Ahui ho, aloha aina.
Free Hawaii Broadcasting Network.